So I was the godmother to a coworker of mine, and the anniversary of the baptism of her daughter was impending, and her daughter was young, and I wanted to give her a gift. I'm going to be completely honest, I wanted to give a great gift. I wasn't very spiritual about the fact that I wanted to be the best spiritual leader in her life. I was a teacher at the time, so my budget being what it was, I went to exactly where you would go if you wanted to be a great gift giver on a budget. I went to Target. I went to the electronics section. I was sort of priced out, so I moved on, looking for greatness on a budget. And then I got this idea to go to the board games aisle and go kind of retro cool, you know? So I saw the traditional board games, you know, Chutes and Ladders, Life, you know, anybody? Bueller, right? Okay, so, and I was deciding which of these board games I was going to get, and I came across a board game I hadn't seen before. And when you work in churches and hang out in churches, you've seen not all the parts, but every board game there is. And this one I hadn't seen before. In fact, I stopped cold in the aisle, and by the way, the aisle in the board game section was not crowded. The name of the board game was Worst Case Scenario. I'm not even going to ask if you've heard of this game because I don't want to get sad. Worst Case Scenario. This is a board game that has been modeled after a best-selling book. It was on the bestseller list called Worst Case Scenario in the New York Times for 68 weeks. Any of you ever heard of Worst Case Scenario, the book? Okay, it's 1,100 pages, and every page is a way that you can die. Literally. And at the bottom of each page, it gives you ways to avoid dying in that way. That's the whole book. There's no narrative, there's no interesting storytelling. It's just page after page of worst-case scenarios. Some fool thought that this was a good idea for a board game. That would be my reaction, right? You pick up a very depressing book and you're like, let's find a way to play this. I love this country. So there was the board game on the shelf. Let's talk about the board game for a second. I did buy it. I wish I had all the money in the world to buy all of them. Worst Case Scenario is actually very interesting. The actual board game is very simple. There's no real art in it. You'll see in a minute it's because its philosophy is quite clear. There's just a bunch of pathways to a group of places you could land at the end of the game. So everyone starts in one place, and then there are 1,100 cards of all the ways you can die, right? It's a nice kind of family night stuff, right? So there's 1,100 of those, and everybody starts with a person like this. You know, I guess you pick a man, or they didn't get the memo about we don't really do that anymore. But anyway, so you pick your person at the beginning of the game, and you have these little removable stickers. They used to be called color forms back in the day. And to decorate your person, you pick 2 arms and 2 legs and a head. Does that make sense? And you stick them on your person, and then you start the game. And what happens is when you land on a square, you then pick a card, and you get told a way you are going to die. And if you find out how to not die, you get a gold coin. And if you get a certain number of coins, you wind up in one of the ending places. Here are the ending places. The first one is called the Mega Million Mansion. It looks like Downton Abbey. It's like this big. Second to it is the Comfy Condo. Kind of a big drop-off, right? The middle one, are you ready for this? Skid Row. Not a lot of choices here, right? And then the fourth place, it says the Graveyard. These are your options, people. You could live in something that looks like the Library of Congress. You could be in a comfy condo. You could be on Skid Row or dead. 10 coins gets you the Mega Million Mansion. You see how it works? So you want to escape 10 ways to die. Comfy condo is like 5 coins. Here's what I love about the game. If you get it wrong, you rip off a limb. And you could choose which one you want. There's no rules. So you could do legs first, you could do a leg and a head. And when you rip off the last thing, graveyard. That's the whole game. Let's play for a minute. I can't even, oh my gosh, okay, this is so depressing. Okay, how to escape a pack of angry rhinoceri. Is there any other kind, like if they're all running at you, is angry really? How to escape an attack of fire ants. How to escape falling from a building while escaping law enforcement. How to survive confronting a mob of angry kangaroos. Are they really angry, though? What to do when you find yourself in quicksand. Like, find yourself, like that just kind of happens. I mean, part of me was like, you were sort of looking for at least the quicksand, right? This is what I don't understand. How to survive greeting a colleague from the Netherlands? I mean, is that really a do or die? I don't even know where the Netherlands are, but I mean, apparently this could be treacherous. How to get your tongue unstuck from a frozen pole? Can you die like that? I mean, I guess. 1,100 ways to die. And if you get it wrong, you lose a limb. Think about it. Wounds or wealth? Those are the only options in this world. Wounds or wealth. I bought this game, and I was a high school chaplain for about 20 years, and I brought it into my senior religion class to show it to them, to show them how broken the world is. And as I showed them this game, one kid raised their hand and said, "That's not a game, that's a documentary." Because remember, these were seniors applying for colleges or the military and stuff like that. They related to this. I then brought it to a parent meeting a couple of nights later on college stress. I was giving how to be a spiritual parent in an unspiritual college process. And when I pulled out the game, they said the same thing. They're like, "My God, that's my life." It's like I went on a tour with this game and everyone just kept looking at it, seeing their experiences reflected in it. That despite their affluence in some cases, or being able to be fed or clothed, they looked at this game and they said, "That's what it feels like, wounds or wealth. Those are my choices. I want to be a good person, but maybe Sigmund Freud is right. Maybe life is seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Yeah, sure, I go to church. I love Christmas and Easter. I like talking about God. But at the end of the day, you got to watch your back. We got to live in the real world." Today is November 11th. It's actually the anniversary of something today. Probably not the thing you're thinking, so let me just tell you what I'm thinking. On November 11th, in the year 1954, a book was released in America. November 11th. It's a book many of you have heard about, but I want to talk about a book that came out just the month before, on September 11th. In 1954. And you really know that book because it's one of the most suggested books in middle school and high school curriculum in the country for 50 years. And what came out on September 11th, 1954 was a book called Lord of the Flies. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because it's a terrible story and I don't want to get sad at how many of you read it. We're not anti-literacy in this tradition. We are Anglicans. We love learning. But this story is a big downer. And if you don't know it, basically a bunch of boarding school boys get left on an island, okay, and they're marooned, and all the adults die. And for about an hour, they're nice to each other. And then all hell breaks loose. And by the end of the story, there's been so much bullying, they take off their uniforms, they put on war paint, there's all this scarcity. Apparently in this church, you guys talk a little bit about empire. This is the island empire. Okay, total scarcity, total fear. And at the end of the story, the smallest, weakest kid actually winds up with his head on a stake There's a bedtime story for you. Talk about wounds or wealth. It's like that game with a story. I don't know why this is one of the most suggested books. I think it's because you're all supposed to learn about human nature. Do you know what I mean? The book is supposed to stand as an example to you of what it would look like to have a certain view of human nature. And where they get it from is these two philosophers. This is not where it begins, but in our culture, in the 17th century, those of you that remember this from high school or college, Hobbes and Locke. Some of you are like, oh, Calvin and Hobbes. Yeah, okay, same Hobbes, different idea. And these are sort of the original philosophers behind the nation state and the formation of modern democratic capitalism. But remember what Hobbes and Locke said. Their famous phrase was, every man is to another a wolf. How about that? That's the Lord of the Flies. That's the wounds or wealth. Look at the person next to you. I mean, according to these guys who have actually twisted the DNA of your daily life in democratic capitalism, they taught that the person next to you is either your lunch or, if you're not careful, you're theirs. That's the philosophy of the empire. Every man is to another a lupus, a wolf. That's depressing. Don't worry, it's good news. Stay tuned. That book came out on September 11th, 1954, but of course it did. 1954, we're still in the first 10 years after the Second World War, right? The world is still digesting the death camps, Nuremberg trials. We are wondering, what do you tell your children? Because Germany was the most well-educated country in Europe. They had the highest per capita number of people with college or graduate degrees. The smartest Europeans invented a death chamber. Doesn't surprise me that we get this book in 1954, and many like it. People who have just given up on any kind of view of humanity other than it's a game, everyone is to another a wolf, you gotta watch your back, because the definition of life is wounds or wealth. Thank God the world only had to live for about 5 weeks with that book unchallenged. Because then on November 11th in 1954, another book is published, Lord of the Rings. And the view of human nature that is from Christ is back. Sorry, the world, for those 5 weeks. J.R.R. Tolkien, who wrote that series, as you know, was a Catholic. He was a contagious Catholic. He wanted the world to understand the freedom and love of God. And he writes The Lord of the Rings, a very different story. Now, just as much violence as Lord of the Flies, right? Lord of the Rings is not some happy bedtime story. There's war and betrayal and suffering and people who live and die under oppression. It's dark, but the light in The Lord of the Rings comes from the fact that all of Middle Earth, it's story after story, person after person, in whom you see the image of God. Some people are not interested in that image, but they can't take it away. It's about faith and friendship and loyalty. And who saves the world? Not the meanest kid on the island, but hobbits. Big, hairy feet. Hobbits save the world with others. Hobbits don't do things alone. They sing all the time. They feast. They live a simple life. Remember, St. Paul says, be fools for Christ. Hobbits are foolish all the time. They die for each other. They believe, they hope. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness. Not so much in the self-control. They can go a little much on the food and drink, but the reason I have hobbit slippers in my house is because it's a reminder of how life works in a Lord of the Rings world. Evil is real. Suffering is intense. But none of its versions of death can change the power of the resurrection. The tomb is empty. Death has lost its sting in Middle Earth and in ours. And those two visions continue to compete to this day. What kind of person are you? What world are you building? A Lord of the Flies world? Or do you come to this altar and see that this is the food of life? I am the bread of life, says the Lord. I came that you might have life and have it abundantly, not play a stupid game of avoiding wounds and seeking wealth. There is another way. That's why we're here today. Not to think about it or even talk about it. I hope I am the least interesting thing about your morning. I know I am the least interesting thing about my morning because I can be a bit of a jerk. I love going out of state and talking because you all don't even know that. But the Lord of life, not the devil who is the Lord of lies and flies that we all renounced in baptism. That's behind us unless you decide to look there. What we turn toward is the altar, the feast. Step off that board game. Stop losing your limbs or being trapped in the fear of losing them. I love today's gospel. That widow takes everything she has. It's stewardship season, which means I can say whatever I want. Whatever you're giving, give more. And remember, the question of the disciple is not how much will I give to God, but how much of what God has given to me am I going to keep? That's the question. God knows what you need. Keep everything you need. But that's the question. Not how much will I give, but how much do I need to keep? My friends, that widow is a Lord of the Rings person. She knows if she gives everything she has, the world will say, now you have nothing. What she'll say is, no, I have everything because what I have that's real and eternal isn't money. I have freedom in the psalm. It says, do not trust in men. They can give you nothing. And the religious leaders in that story, it said they devour the resources of the widows. They are on the island of the flies. They are playing that game to win as they see limbs taken off of others and they go straight for the mega million mansion. I don't judge them because Jesus said, I didn't come to the world to judge. So if Jesus isn't here to judge, that's not what I'm allowed to do. I weep for the parts of me that get afraid and want the coin. And I do get afraid for what in life tears off my limbs or those that I love. That makes me human. And it makes me come to Jesus and say the words from Scripture, Lord, I believe, help me with my unbelief. Maybe that's where you are this morning. You want to get off the board game of wounds or wealth. You want to get off the island of the Lord of the Flies. There's something about the idea of hobbits saving the world that makes you think you really can make your office a better place, even though you don't have the power. If you're a non-white person and you live in the world and you realize that our country is structurally committed to your not advancing, that's not an accident. But be a hobbit and know there are other people who will join with you in this church, with my bestie, Father Jason, with whom I have a lot in common, including, as I said Friday night, a complete lack of curiosity for moderation. So I leave you with this thought. Free will is a terrifying thing in some ways, because you can choose not once, but every day of your life, every morning as the mercies of God are new to you, you can choose what kind of world you want to build. Is it a Lord of the Rings world? Are you willing to realize that Jesus became a hobbit and not a king or a lord? Or are you going to let your fear take over and say, I'm going to play the board game just for one more day? There was once a little girl and her older brother. They were both children, and they went out on Halloween. And they both had their pillowcases to fill up. And the older brother was old enough that he was kind of eating the candy like all night. By the time he got home, he only had a few pieces. His little sister hadn't eaten anything all night. And when she got back home, she let in her candy and rationed it until Christmas. And her lousy older brother came into the room and he saw all this laid out and he started to immediately think, how do I get some of this candy from my sister? And then he remembered that a few years ago, he had a collection of marbles that everyone in the family knew about. And he had this idea, because he didn't really care about the marbles anymore, but she didn't know that. So he went down the hall and he went to his marble collection. So he goes walking to his sister, pretending to be sad, and said, I have decided I would like to trade with you my collection of marbles for your collection of candy. Now, she was young, but she knew this was like trading up. She was kind of surprised. So she was like, well, sure, let me just get the candy together. So he walks down the hall and he can't believe he pulled it off. Jerk. Family member. So he then looks into the shoebox, and there's a couple in there that are actually pretty cool. And he decides he's going to take one or two out, just the super cool ones, because she's not going to miss that. So he takes out one or two, actually takes out three, puts them under the pillow, walks down the hallway, hands over white-knuckled the collection, going through all the stages of grief, and just takes the candy. And he's eating it as he's walking down the hall. He can't believe he pulled it off. And he hears his sister singing and dancing and jumping on the bed. She's naming the marbles. And then she just falls asleep in a total blissed out, I'm getting older, I traded up, I'm a real person, yay, sleep. The Bible calls that the sleep of the just. But he can't sleep. In fact, he's up most of the night because he's haunted by just one question. I wonder if she gave me all the candy. One of the great and liberating truths of Christianity, and if any of you are in here who are not Christians, I'm going to tell you one of our secrets. One of the great truths is that what you hide for yourself will haunt you. When the world says, don't give everything to that relationship. Don't go all in. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't give yourself away. All these lies of the island of the flies that says if you want to give some of yourself, leave a couple of marbles for you. And Christianity with Christ on the cross, arms spread out to the world, says, when you give everything, not only is that itself liberating, but you will not be haunted. You will be able to experience that kind of love because you've done it. Don't make unconditional love a mystery to yourself. Do it. And trust me, it'll be easier for you to feel it from anyone. Don't sow the seeds of your own doubt. And you may say, but it's not safe to give yourself to everyone. Go back to the psalm. You're not supposed to give it to anyone. Here. The reason the priest will put his or her arms out is to symbolize that it is safe here to give your whole life. Because that is what God has done for us. So today, when it's time for the offering, don't just send your coin up like the woman. Realize the widow didn't give some money. She gave all of her money, which is a symbol of everything she had. And you know what that means? She gets to leave there not playing the game of Windsor Wealth. She gets to leave that day from her synagogue knowing that she's given everything. And trust me, it's not going to be that hard to feel like God has given her everything. What you hold will haunt you. One of the reasons Harry Potter is such an important story for so many people. Last year, I almost had to give it up for Lent. I love it so much. Is because it's a story, unlike Narnia, that says you have to leave the world to go to Narnia to learn about God. Remember, the magic of Harry Potter is it happens in the world. People realize who they are in the world. You know what I'm saying? You don't have to go through a wardrobe. And for some of you who are like, yes, but what I love about Narnia is anyone can go through the wardrobe. And in Harry Potter world, you've got to get your letter. And baby, you're not going to get in. Remember, J.K. Rowling grew up in a household that was not religious, but she used to hang out in the church. She lived on a street called Church Street. And on Saturdays, she would go where her family did not want to go, and she would play in the church just like this. And by 10 years old, she said, I want to join. How do I do that? And the priest was like, well, you got to be baptized. You got to ask your parents. Her parents tragically said, we don't care. So she was baptized in that church on her own volition. It was called St. Luke's. Picture her at that font on her birthday when she was 11. Now, if you also need to give up Harry Potter for Lent, you know exactly why that number matters. That's when you get your Hogwarts letter. Because that woman who was an Anglican who wrote that story, who still goes to church every week, she said, what it really means to be a witch or wizard is to be baptized. It's written into the story. It's on Harry's 11th birthday. So that's not the day. This is not some predestination. This isn't a Calvinist story. You want a Hogwarts letter? Get wet. Make the choice she made. Get off the board game. Get out of this wounds or wealth and say, I want an eternal and abundant life. So my friends, today, lose your marbles. In the name of God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.